So this week we're focused on investigating different units of measurement for length, weight, and capacity. And so today we're going to be thinking about how we can take sets of data that we gather using these different units of measurement and then represent them visually. So I'm going to give you a real life example, and then you're going to have the opportunity to try this on your own with different items that you can find around your house. I'm going to be using length, but your example can use weight, length, or capacity. It does not have to use length. If you choose to, that's fine, but you don't have to. So one thing that a lot of you guys know about me is I like to crochet. I actually crocheted this scarf that I'm wearing right now. And when I'm crocheting, I have these leftover pieces of yarn that I end up throwing away. They're too little to be used for something else. And so I'm curious about how much yarn I'm getting rid of when I'm doing a crochet project. So I'm going to be creating a table here to organize my information as I measure my pieces of yarn. So remembering that it's really important when we create tables or graphs or charts to include labels, right? Just like we've been doing throughout the unit. So the title of this chart that I'll be making is Leftover Yarn, right? That's what I'm talking about, my leftover yarn. I'm going to be finding the lengths of all of these pieces of yarn. So on the left-hand side here, I'm going to put length, and then right now is a good time to decide how specific I'm going to be with my measurements. Each of these pieces of yarn is none of them are exactly the same size, and so it might be really difficult to be super specific. And so I might decide right now that I'm going to only measure to the nearest half inch. So that's what I'm going to put here, nearest half inch. So that will be one side of my table. The other side of my table is where I'm going to be making my tally marks to keep track of how many pieces of yarn are a specific length. So I know if I'm measuring to the nearest half inch, the smallest unit of measure that I could possibly have for this data set would be a half of an inch, right? A half inch. And then I'll continue to work up from there by half-inch increments until I get to my longest one, which looks to be about maybe 9 or 10 inches. So I've got half inch as my first option, and then another half inch above that would be 1 inch. Those two little marks that look like quotation marks, that's our math notation for inch. So if you see that, that's what that means. I'll add another half inch, so I've got 1.5 inches, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5, 8, and I ran out a bit of space. If I need any more, I could just continue my table over here. 8.5, 9, 9.5, 10, and I don't think I'm going to need anything greater than that. All right, so here's what we're going to do now. Now that we've got our table set up, I'm now going to actually start measuring my pieces of yarn and then recording the lengths on my table. So I'll start with this piece here. As I set it next to my ruler, I see to the nearest half inch, let's see, it looks like it goes just past 3.5 inches, but it's closer, let's see, it looks like it's 3 3/4, and so that would round up to 4 inches. So I'll make a tally in the 4 inches section of my T-chart. This piece is done, so I'm going to set it off to the side. Got this long one here. Let's check this one out. All right, if I set it up on my ruler here, It looks like this one is about 8.5 inches. So I'll go back to my table here and I'll make a tally mark in my 8.5 inches column. This one's all done, so I'll set it over to this side with my original one. Here's a little short little one. If I stick it on my ruler here, it looks like it's just about an inch, not quite an inch and a half, so I'll put a tally mark in my 1 inch section. Set it off to the side. Over here, this one seems to be 1 3/4 inches. That's closer to 2 inches, so I'll make a tally mark there. Got my next one. This seems to be about 2.5 inches, so I'll make a tally mark at 2.5. Let's see here. Ooh, this one's pretty close. If I'm measuring to the nearest 1/2 inch, I see that this piece of yarn goes to 2 1/4. If I'm measuring to the nearest 1/2 inch, I would round down to 2 inches for that one. So I'll make another tally mark in that 2 inch column. Here's a second to last piece of yarn. It looks to be about 2.5 inches. So I'll make another tally in that 2.5 inches section. And then here's my last piece. And that looks to be about almost 4 inches. So we will mark another tally mark in that 4 inches section. All right, so those are all of my pieces of yarn. That's all of my data for this data set. And so now as I look at this, right, I can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different pieces of information here. And if I want to just double check, I can count to make sure that I had 8 pieces of yarn to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks like we're all good. 8 pieces of information. So now, this is great. We have a really organized table of our information, but it's not visually very easy to understand, right? I'm seeing a lot of blank space on here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to transfer this information to a line plot, all right? So when we have a line plot, we're going to take the data that we have in this table and we're going to represent it visually. So I'm going to grab my whiteboard here and I'm going to start by drawing a simple, almost just like a line, actually not almost a line, exactly a line along the bottom of my board, right? Now remember, just as labels are super important in a T-chart or the chart that we just made, they're also super important for a line plot. And so I'm going to write here that this line plot is going to represent the length of leftover yarn in inches, right? So I'm telling you what I'm measuring, the length. I'm telling you how I'm measuring it. I'm measuring in inches. And then even more specifically, I'll say to the nearest 1/2 inch. And now is the important part, right? I know that I've got from 0 all the way up to 8.5, right? That's the range of my data, from 0 inches all the way to 8.5 inches. So on my line plot here, I want to represent that, and I want to move in equal increments, just like we did in our table, right? I don't jump from 1/2 inch to 2.5 inches. I don't jump from 1 inch to 2 inches just because there's nothing at 1.5, right? So I want to make sure that the scale that I'm following on my line plot is also equal. So I'm going to start at 0, and then I'm going to work my way up to 8.5 or even 9. So I might start by going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so that I can kind of space it out equally. And then, you know what, I might move this title down just a little bit so that you can see a little bit easier. So that title again was length of leftover yarn in inches to the nearest 1/2 inch. All right, now I can go back and I can add in those half inches on my scale here. So in between 0 and 1, I'd have 1/2. In between 1 and 2, I'm sure you know, you would have 1 and 1/2, and so on as I move down my scale here. So I'm going to take a second to fill that in. All right, now here's the fun part. We get to use the information that's on this table here and visually represent it on our line plot. So let me show you what that looks like. I see that at 1 inch, I've got 1 tally mark and nothing at 0 or 1/2 inch or 0 inches, right? So I can leave those completely blank. And then when I get to that 1 inch, I have 1 tally mark. So what I'll do when I get to 1 is make 1 X. When I get to 1.5 inches, I see there's nothing there. So I'll leave that blank on my line plot here as well. But when I get to 2 inches, I have 2 tally marks. So I would place 2 X's on top of each other to show at 2 inches, I've got how many pieces of data? I've got 2 pieces of data or 2 pieces of yarn. Moving on at 2.5, I've also got 2 data points. So I'll make 2 X's again. Skipping down to 4 inches, that's where again I see another 2 pieces of data. So I'll make 2 X's there. And then this is all blank. So I'm going to leave all of this blank until I get to 8.5, where I have a 1 piece of yarn, 1 data point. So I'll make 1 X on 8.5. Now, here's what I've got. Now I can visually see the length of leftover yarn in inches by looking at this yarn plot. I can quickly glance and see that I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of data. It looks like most pieces of yarn are 4 inches or less. And then we've got this outlier over here at 8.5. It looks like most pieces of yarn aren't really 1 inch either. They're seeming to be in between 2 and 4 inches of yarn left over from my crochet project. That information isn't as easy to see visually using this table. This table is really great for collecting information when there's a lot of information to sort through, but then transferring that information to this line plot allows you to analyze the data a little bit more and to see it visually a little bit better. So some of the takeaways that I just mentioned here about what we can see from this data is that most pieces seem to be between 2 and 4 inches long. The outliers, right, those pieces of data that don't seem to fit in, so the 1 inch and 8.5 inches seem to be outliers. All right, now this part here where we're analyzing, that's not even technically part of our lesson, but I think it's something that we're totally capable of with this information. So what you guys are going to do today is you are going to find a set of anything around your house. It could be toy cars, it could be pencils, it could be stuffed animals, it could be humans, it could be living things. And you are going to collect data using a T-chart that you create on paper pencil. And then you are going to turn that T-chart into a line plot. And then you're going to see what observations you can make about that data based off of your line plot. Remember, you do not have to use length. You can use weight, you can use volume, but you do not have to use weight. So I can't wait to see all of the awesome line plots that you guys have and the data that you're able to analyze and see all those awesome things that you have to share. Can't wait. Have fun.